Nice to hi, hello everyone. It's nice to see everyone is joining already. We will begin shortly in a few minutes. Before that, once again, if you would like to ask your questions already, you can post them in the Q&A section. And if you wouldn't mind, also introduce yourself. Where are you from? What is your background? What is your role in your company? That would be really interesting. You can post that in the chat. Make sure when you're sending something in the chat that you're sending to everyone, not just to the host and the panelists. Now let's get to the topic. So today we're going to be discussing how to write good OKRs and what is a good OKR. A good OKR is a kind of goal that engages the team and makes sure that everyone doesn't forget about achieving those goals. This is something that a lot of companies are struggling with because we do set goals, but then we forget to achieve them. And so that doesn't happen to you and it doesn't happen in your company. Richard today is going to tell us how to write good OKRs and engage the team with them. Richard is the head of customer success in Weekdone. He is an OKR expert and has been helping companies to implement goal setting, planning, strategy for already 15 years, Richard, is it?
Yes, not 50 as you said last time.
Yeah, last time said 50. I'm sorry about that. So really, since this is the live webinar, I encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions from Richard because, well, chances are, again, Richard knows the answer for sure to that question. So let's try and see how far we can stretch this topic because it is actually involving a lot of different questions that we have been receiving before this webinar. So over to you. Let's begin.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Thanks for the introduction. I hope everybody can see the screen okay. Everything's working fine there. So basically we're spot on time, so let's get started. So basically, just to recap a couple of things Anna said before, if people weren't already logged in. The recording of the webinar will be sent out within 24 hours of finishing. You can ask questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. As Anna mentioned, we have a group of people ready to answer the questions. We are going to come back at the end and try and group and answer any of those bigger questions or topic areas as well in the discussions. Introduce yourself in the chat to all. Let us know where you're from in the world and your role in the organization would be great. So I see a few people are starting to actually add those, which is excellent. Next, okay. The other thing I'd just like to say here, if there is any topics you'd like to see covered in webinars, we are planning to do in January, February, and March, another series of webinars. We like to do webinars on practical topics, and the best way to get good practical topics is find out what are the things that people are struggling with, or what would people like to really understand better about OKRs and goal setting. So if you have got areas you would like us to do a webinar on, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So what are we going to cover today? Well, really, we're going to start with a really brief introduction of what's the point of OKRs and what does and doesn't drive creativity. There's a lot of ways that people write OKRs that actually they think they're setting good goals, but in the end, they're actually setting goals that don't drive engagement and creativity. What do you need to really think about to set good OKRs? Why are the outcomes and outputs so important to make the whole process work? It really revolves around that, and that's where we're going to get to in the end. That's the important area. And then we're going to come on to any questions. So ask your questions as we go along. The team will be basically summarizing those, and they will walk through and ask sort of some of those topic areas at the end of the webinar here. So let's get started. Why are we using OKRs? Well, I guess many of you may have read Measure What Matters or other topics, but really there's four main areas, four main superpowers it's talked about of OKRs. Focus and commitment to priority. So basically we're setting the focus on what is priority, what's priority to improve. We're trying to align, we're trying to connect the company, teams, everybody together in a common direction. We're trying to use that focus from the top to the bottom of the organization. We're tracking what we do for accountability. We're setting OKRs, we're setting goals that track what we do. And then it's talked about stretch. Now, I would say in most cases, most teams and people will set naturally stretched OKRs. People always believe they can do more or achieve more than's realistic. So stretch actually, I think a lot of times naturally happens with OKRs, but that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to drive improvements in a business. And that's exactly what OKRs are for, and that is their purpose. Now, that doesn't mean that's what people start out doing. So what doesn't work? And if we understand what OKRs are not and the way you can write OKRs that aren't engaging and aren't working and won't drive creativity, it'll help you actually write ones that are. So the first big problem, KPIs are not the same as KRs or key results. So a lot of times companies say, well, our objective is to grow 10x, and then they write down all their revenue targets, some increasing of customers and what a salesperson should sell. Great. They think they're done. Big problem. Their KPIs and targets, that they're key performance indicators. They are business metrics, they are measurable, but they are not really telling us how to improve. They're not setting a direction, they're not setting a focus, they're just reiterating often targets and KPIs that are already known in the organization. They really don't tell us how and what we need to improve in the organization or in a team to reach it. KPIs ultimately don't excite. Now, I love KPIs, they're exceptionally useful. I'm not saying you shouldn't have them, you need them, but they're not the things that drive excitement. They don't motivate people to change the way they're thinking and change what they're doing. So it's very common for people to just put the KPIs in, call it KRs, because they read KRs must be measurable. Now, we need to actually set measures, key results are measures. We need to set measures that can be impacted in the quarter. We're writing OKRs in most cases for a quarter. And it's very common to see, especially in the early days, you write KRs that are going to take much, much longer to be impacted. So, for example, in this case, we've got increase the number of customers by 50%. But hold on, maybe we have a sales cycle of 6 months. We are not going to see a 50% increase in customers in the quarter, because whatever we do to improve it this quarter, the actual outcome of increasing customers will be 6-9 months down the road. So we need to think about our key results. We need to think about, can they be impacted? If we do something today, will we see results of that in the key result measures? It's very common that setting those type of KRs that don't progress, or we're working on and we don't see any progress in the KRs, demotivates. In a lot of cases, you hear people say, well, OKRs don't work for us. We did A, B, and C, but there was no move in the key results. Well, it's not that OKRs aren't working. It's simply we haven't looked at the right measures, the right outcomes we need to change from the actions we take. The next is, and very, very common in product teams or highly project-led teams. So project plans, to-dos, outputs become our key results. And in a lot of cases, these are elements that we need to do. They're binary, done, not done. We could argue that, hey, you know, create a dashboard by the beginning of the year is a project, and we've got some form of percentage measure. But in most cases, if you're doing projects or plans or even to-dos, you are measuring these in other tools, or you're setting up what the lists of outputs that need doing, the things I need to do, and counting them off. Reiterating it as OKRs or covering it in the same thing in a different area doesn't really help you. You know, it doesn't drive any outcome. It doesn't give us an improvement. What to do is already predefined. You know, we don't need to collaborate to work on this. We've already listed out the projects, or we've decided what we're going to do. And in a lot of cases, they aren't truly measurable. We might be measuring outputs, but that's not the measures we want. And we're going to come on to a little bit more about outcomes and outputs and the difference behind those. Now, the key results are often the part that people struggle with the most. It's a big difference. But saying that, in a lot of cases, the reason they struggle is often the starting point, the objective. Now, take a look at this one. Achieve 10x growth. Very broad, very generic, you know, could apply to everybody. I'm sure most of you in businesses said, well, yeah, we'd love to get 10 times growth. Great. That 10x growth, though, probably isn't realistic for a quarter. You know, if we're writing OKRs for a quarter, that 10x growth isn't something we can probably do. We might say, well, we want 10x growth in a year, etc. But for a quarter, probably not. Is it believable? Is it motivating? Is it focused? In this case, not really. It's very generic. It's ending up, and quite commonly ending up, where everybody writes these generic objectives of improvement, which are very broad, but they aren't really focused. And if we don't have a focused objective, how do we write good outcome-based key results? The truth is we don't. So that objective needs meaning and purpose. You know, what is a realistic objective for this quarter? What is it that we really need to set a focus on to improve? And that will actually allow us to think about and set good key results. So a lot of times the objective is overlooked or seen as easy, but really making sure that we've set what is a good objective. And often the hard thing is what scope of objective, how big is it, how broad is it? Now, the big problem here is if I said achieve 10x growth, I could actually come up with many, many different areas that it could come from. So it could come from upsell, geographic expansion, products, leads, you know, and I could go on and on and on and on. I could probably come up with 50 or 60 different areas that could drive the business forwards and grow us. Now, the problem in a sense is because of that, if I shared 10x growth or I said 10x growth, I'm not setting any particular area. I'm not setting a direction for that growth improvement. And OKRs are really about making sure that you set a good direction and focus. So thinking through what level it needs to be is certainly important. At the beginning, it's not always easy. Sometimes you have to get started and try and learn what is a good objective for us. How big or how narrow should an objective be for us to achieve it within a quarter? But we need to think about it. So what does make OKRs fail? Well, OKRs that just duplicate KPIs doesn't really bring any value, doesn't motivate people to think about how they're actually and what they're doing to drive improvements and understand, is it working? Oh, sorry, jumped a couple there. OKRs that use lagging measures. So we talked about earlier, you know, 6-month sales cycle and saying we want to increase the customers. Doesn't work. We don't see any progress. That demotivates people. They don't believe they're showing that what they're doing has value. OKRs that measure output completion. It's telling you whether you did the outputs. It's not telling you whether you truly improved. It doesn't tell you, did we improve as a business? Did we drive outcomes that often are talked about as customer outcomes? Did we make them improve? Did we generate improvement in the business? Broad objectives lacking focus on the problems to solve. So very generic, broad objectives where everybody could almost say, in any company. That objective could apply to every business. Very common. You see a lot of people starting out to use very, very broad, unfocused objectives. Objectives that can't be impacted in a quarter or don't make progress in a quarter. You know, if I'm working on something, I want to see the outcomes of my actions change, and I want to see my objective progress. That drives people to do more, to think about what's next, to think about how do we keep it moving forward and keep it improving. Most of us, when first writing OKRs, will actually write exactly these types. Certainly in Weekdone, we see a lot of customers and we see a lot of people starting out with OKRs. And I can tell you probably in 80 to 90% of cases, this is exactly where people start. It isn't something that's going to help. You do need to go back and think about how do we write OKRs and think about the purpose of OKRs and what they're there for. So how should they be written? Well, the objectives should be qualitative and inspirational. They're not KPI business metrics targeted. They're not project to-dos. The objective should be a problem statement. What are we trying to fix? And before we start jumping into how we're going to fix it, what we're going to do, even what are the outcomes we need to drive, having a good, clear problem statement is important. Good words in our objective line would be things like improve, achieve, identify, maximize. What are we trying to do? Explain it clearly without too long a sentence. It should be achievable within a quarter. It needs to be actionable by the teams independently. So the team that's setting an OKR needs to be able to actually action things that will drive that objective. It's their objective. They need to own it. It should provide clear value and purpose. You know, everybody in the team that's working on an OKR needs to understand and agree that this is the focus. This is the problem we need to fix. And if we fix this problem, it will move the business forward. It's not so complicated to think about an objective, but it takes a little bit of time. So the key results, usually the one where most people struggle a bit more, measurable, quantifiable. With a key result, you measure the progress of the objective. So by saying, I want to fix or improve or whatever it is, the key results are the measures. They're what success looks like. They're outcomes of that if we change, will show us or will drive the objective progress. A KR is not a KPI target. You know, we keep saying that, but it's very, very common. Everybody wants to throw things in there. You want to make sure people set the outcomes they want to drive. You've usually got between 2 and 5 KRs per objective. So very common to see 3. It's kind of the optimal number. Definitely don't have more than 5. You don't list everything and try and measure everything there. You've got to set a focus. You're trying to get the outcomes and focus on it. If it doesn't have a number, it's not a key result. However, just because it does have a number also doesn't mean it's a key result. KPIs and targets are one thing. Counting the number of tasks we complete or story points really isn't a great key result. So it has to be measurable. It has to have a number, but the number has to be measuring outcomes. And we're going to come to that in a little bit later in a bit more detail. Has to be achievable and engaging. We have to make it move in a quarter. You know, if we do something in a team, and we're going to talk a little bit about outputs and outcomes, what I do is an output and it has to drive the outcome. The key result is the outcome I want. So if I did something, if I do an update or launch a new product, there's some outcome. There was a reason I launched that. And that's a measurable outcome we want to track. It's not just a mix of business metrics from different areas. A team needs to also be able to impact their KRs on an ongoing basis. So back to this point that I need to be able to do something to drive the key results forward. It has to be something I can impact. If I set a key result and I can't do something to make it change, it doesn't make me feel great, and it'll happen. You know, we've been doing OKRs for something like 6 years or so, and I would say we still write ones where we don't get progress. Sometimes you don't know. You have ideas of how to drive forward, they don't work. So you never set one. You need to think through, do we believe we can drive it forward? It's not always going to be the case that it will move, but you need to at least start with that premise that it will. They need to be outcomes instead of outputs. It's so, so important to OKRs. You know, OKRs are all about setting outcomes instead of outputs. Outputs is the way we've traditionally managed businesses, but it's not the way that works. So let's kind of walk through a simple example here. So the first thing is, in most cases, we're talking about going from a company objective to a team OKR. So graphically here, we are often as a team, in this case, in the green, the product objective, we're gonna put ourselves in the shoes of a product team, but we're writing an OKR that aligns with a company objective. So it starts from the company level. And then we're going to talk a little bit about initiatives, projects, and plans that drive the product objective forward. So let's say the company objective has been set, and this is where, in a way, OKRs start from the top. They start from the head of the company, you know, and setting good company objectives is important. The same thing applies to company objectives as it does to the objective part with key results for teams. But in this case, the company has said, right, okay, improve clients' understandings of the value of our product. And why is it important? Well, maybe we understand that, well, we've got a great product, but somewhere along the line, we're not maximizing the conversion of potential clients. We don't get them to see the value. We don't get them to see the aha moment as quick as we would like. And we believe that's an issue. That's something we would like to improve as a business. Now, this could impact multiple teams within the business, but we're going to talk in this case about the product team. So the product team needs to think about, you know, what can we do to fix or improve? What can be achieved within 90 days, within a quarter? How will we know we're improving? So the product team went away, and as a team, they came up with their objective. And in this case, they said, right, okay, we believe the area we could fix as a product team is the first impressions to new users from our product. So when people first come in, we believe we can connect with them better, connect with what they're trying to achieve, what the point of the product is, better and improve it. Why is that important? Well, we see that the number of people engaging on the first visit and returning could be improved. So maybe we understand that we've got 20, 30% of people, and we could get 50, 60, 70% of people returning to the product. Maybe we're losing too many on the first entry. So the product team have set that almost as an objective. You could quasi say it's a hypothesis of what they believe the problem is as well. And now they need to go away and think about the outcomes needed. How can we measure success of improve the first impressions? So the first thing is, you know, a lot of times they'll go off and the first things that will start coming out are outputs. Okay, we could revamp the onboarding process. We can add new features the competitors don't have. We need to make sure we complete the sprints. But those aren't key results. Those are the things we're going to do. Now, they're important. Things, ideas of improvements are important, but what we need to achieve as outcomes is actually the thing we need to list as key results. So basically here we have said, right, okay, a good key result might be increase the time duration of the first session from 2 minutes average to 15 minutes average. So people come in, they stay longer. That would show us, that's an outcome of behavior change that would show us we have improved. Second one, increase the percentage of second-time logins within 7 days from 7 to 30%. So maybe they're saying, well, okay, when people first come in, within the next 7 days, we would expect much higher than 7% to return. We'd expect 30% to return. And that, again, is a behavioral change in our customers that we're going to try and change. So at 7, we're going to try and move it to 30. And then the last one is reduce the percentage of rage clicks. So for those of you, maybe you're looking at some videos and you can see people clicking because they're frustrated. They don't know what to do next in a product, for example, and they start clicking. So great. On the right, we have 3 very good, clear key results. They're outcomes, they're behaviors. We're trying to change customer behaviors. Customers don't have to be external. They could be internal customers, but often the way of thinking about outcomes is about this customer behavior. So really, it's very, very important. There's a clear reason why it's important. If I listed the left side as my key results, I've almost defined what I'm going to do. There's very little flexibility. I'm not going to test and try different things to achieve an outcome. I'm just going to complete the projects that we've set for that. Now, I would need to think about it and say, well, I need those outputs. I need to do things to drive the key results forward. And absolutely, you need to come up with those. And often what you'll do is when you set a key result as an outcome, you still think about what is it I need to drive forward? What are the initiatives or what plans and what am I going to do to actually make sure that I've got ideas to drive it forward? Again, we said it had to be actionable by our teams. If I don't have any ideas how to make it change, it's not a good key result either. So we're not saying that outputs aren't important, but we need to first set the outcomes. And from the outcomes, we will think about and define some of the bigger, higher level ideas of what we're going to work on to drive it forward, which very much is once we've set the company aligned team objectives, we're going to think about the initiatives, projects, plans, tasks that need to get done to drive it forward. Different companies will do that in different ways. Some might, and in fact, even within a company, different teams can do it differently. You know, a product team might have project management solutions. They'll think much more about bigger initiatives. If it was a sales team, for example, they might say, well, we can be a little more agile. We'll just set plans. We'll think about what we're going to do this week, see if it works, and try something new each week. It changes with different groups, different teams, whether you're agile, using agile processes in product teams also, the way you work, how do you work now? How do you drive improvements and things forward? So there's no one way to do it, but it is important to get those executional items done. But now you're setting them to drive the OKRs forward. You've got a clear, measurable outcome to show whether you're successful or not. What that does is really drive the discussions. So the outputs, the deliverables are typically done or not done. You know, in a lot of cases, we do a task, we don't do a task. There's a check. In many ways, usually you could say, we hope it brings success. You know, we expect it to bring success, but we don't know. One of the big reasons why OKRs are popular is people have typically set projects and they check off, is it done? You know, on time, on budget, success. But if it was that easy to always drive and improve a business, we wouldn't need OKRs. But OKRs came about because often people aren't thinking about whether it truly drove us forward. And a lot of businesses studying it, more people like Google and Walmart and a lot of the bigger proponents of OKRs have worked out that it's rare to see even 30% of your projects actually drive improvement. 30% will be neutral and 30% will actually be detrimental. So really understanding whether you're driving the outcomes, the business outcomes forward, improving it for customers is super important. You know, outputs show effort, not value. It might change if it doesn't bring results. You might start doing something, you might start a project, but understand after a short time, well, this doesn't actually drive the outcomes we thought it was going to do. Honestly, in Weekdone, we often see that. We start something, we think, we strongly believe this is the right thing to do. We start working on it, measuring it, and we say, it's not driving what we expected to happen. And we change and adapt. Outcomes, measurable results we want to achieve after doing something. observable changes in customer behavior. There's different ways to think about it. I mean, I often think about, what does success look like? How would I measure where we are today to where we want to be as outcomes, as customer behaviors, as success? It shows the success loud and clear. Typically, your outcome stays the same until it's achieved. It's not common to change outcomes. Those are usually something you want to drive forward. But the outcomes really are there to help us set the outputs and to measure success. So two together are super important. As you can imagine, to set outcomes, you really need to discuss. It's really, really important that the team discusses what the outcomes are. What are the things we can measure? How would we see success? And set them. And then think about what are the deliverables? What are the outputs we need to get done that should drive those? And segment and separate everything so we can truly work on execution, but understand whether that executional part is really driving success, outputs versus outcomes. Now, what we have done, for any of you that are using Miro, you can find us on the Miroverse. Maybe if somebody on the call, Anna or Morel or Tanner, if you could drop that link into the chat for everybody. We do have also a Miro board to help you kind of build your OKRs, to align and build OKRs. You can modify it, you can update it and change it. Obviously, Weekdone, we are an OKR software, but we also provide some of the tools in other ways to help you ideate and develop and drive good process in setting OKRs as well. So basically, that's come almost to the end, but what I want to do is just kind of summarize here. So what have we learned about what makes OKRs work? Well, KRs are outcomes and drive discussion, super important. If we set KRs as KPIs or we set them as what we need to get done, there is no need to discuss it. It just is. That's not what they should be. They should be driving people to discuss and think about how they're going to move it forward. They should be engaging. That's the point of KRs. KRs are there to measure if we're achieving our objective. If we improve the KR, it should be aligning, or it should help us achieve our objective. KRs need to be something we can change with outputs in the near term, within the quarter. But even so, even if I did something today, if I could only see the outcome in 13 weeks' time, it's going to be very difficult to improve and iterate. You're looking for things that measures that you can change. And in a lot of cases, there always is a measure that's closer to the point you're trying to change, that you have to really think through what is it that we're expecting to see move or change. We need clear, actionable and focused objectives if you're going to write good key results, or if you're going to set good company level objectives to drive the teams to set good OKRs. We need clear, actionable and focused objectives. What is important to us? What is important to improve? It's also important everybody believes the objective is valuable. It's no good setting something that people look at and go, oh, not that again. This year we're going to 5x the business and we're going to reach $1 billion, and everybody's kind of like, yeah, we hear it every year. It needs to be something that people can really engage with and really can get behind and really can think about how and want to drive forward. OKRs take time, effort, and discussions. I think one thing you sometimes see is people want to jump straight to the OKR. They want to set their OKRs in 5 minutes. Honestly, to do them well, it will take you time, effort, and discussion. Now, the first time you do it, it's going to take a lot more time, effort, and discussion than later on. But, what is so important is don't get overly bogged down in that. Start, practice OKRs. Get started writing OKRs. You will write them poorly and improve them as you go. Practice is really what delivers good OKRs. It takes multiple quarters to get good. It's so important not to get bogged down in the time, effort, and discussions and not ever set the OKRs. It's important to actually start delivering on OKRs, write them, practice them, learn. So there's a balance there, but the better you start out, the more you set them towards outcomes, the better you will get started, the more engaging people will find it. So that's really the end of the session here. I hope you found that useful. If you do have other questions or you come up with questions later, you can email us at hello@Weekdone. We've also got up there the LinkedIn company account. You can email me at richard@Weekdone, and my LinkedIn is also on the page here below. So that's it from me. I hope we've got some good questions. It looks like it. Just have to move some things on my page. So, Anna, I can't hear you. Is it me or? Hello, Anna. Oops. Small technical problem with the, I hope everybody could hear me. Okay. 1 second. Okay, Anna's got the questions. She was going to start asking me the questions. She's just got a technical glitch with the microphone. So.
Hello.
Okay, back again. Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, so we do have some questions, and actually some of those questions are more like a story than a question, so it will require some of the background information. Let's begin with the simpler ones, and then we will move on to the ones that are more like a story situation.
Super.
So the first question is, can we set cross-functional OKRs for several teams, not just for one?
Okay. Yes. I guess the big question is, what do you mean by cross-functional? One of the big problems is, I think what I often see is people read Measure What Matters, and they understand that breaking down silos is important, and they're right. But what do people mean by cross-functional OKRs? Often people start to link what everybody does together in a way that actually causes confusion. With OKRs, one of the first silos of breaking down or cross-functional elements is setting company level objectives, and the teams are working to a single objective. Now, you might have multiple company objectives and different teams are working to a different combination of those, but you've got a high level objective. Hey, we want to drive, as an example, we want to improve the customer value or the aha moment, the percentage of people seeing that aha moment at the first entries. Now, that might affect the product team, might also be the onboarding and the sales teams have something to do in there. It could also be that the marketing team has something to do with driving that forward. In a sense, that's that's an objective at the company level, which is driving the teams to improve to a single objective. The question comes about, what do you mean by cross-functional? Because just connecting lines between teams doesn't make it work. It's not what makes OKRs work, and it's not what makes teams collaborative in a lot of cases. What makes them collaborative is understanding what each other team's doing and changing what you do in a team or how your team operates to help other teams. So it's a far more complicated problem, and you really need to think about, what do you mean about cross-functional? It's very easy to say, but drawing lines between OKRs between different teams isn't what's going to work. It often just makes nobody accountable. So we'd have to have a bit more information on that. But when you're talking about cross-function, really think what you're trying to achieve. You have to have teams accountable for what they need to do, but you need commonality in the way they're working. Where one team needs to do something for another, you need a team OKR that's aligned to the other team's OKR. think through what you mean by cross-functional. It's an overused word, often badly done. And actually, we've seen many companies that cross-function everything to the point where nothing works. So really, really stand back and think about what you're trying to achieve and what's possible. I hope that answered the question there.
Yeah, and also feel free to follow up. So if you want more clarification, feel free to post your question in the chat while we're still here and while we're still discussing these questions. But for now, let's move on to the next one.
Yeah.
It's more on the topic OKRs versus KPIs, which is our favorite topic of all times. And the question is, what if we don't have defined KPIs yet? Can we still implement OKRs?
Yes, of course. I mean, even if you don't have, formal KPIs, I would say most businesses have some directions they want, or when they're starting out, certainly with a lot of startups, you maybe have some targets, some areas you want to go, but you don't really have KPIs at the beginning. But there's things you need to improve, or there's behavior changes you need to drive. The KRs are outcomes. You might actually start to set things that later on become your KPIs, and they move off your OKR list into KPIs. So you certainly can, as long as you're setting your KRs as the outcomes you want to drive and measure. The only reason you couldn't set OKRs is if you didn't have anything to improve. Everybody else could use OKRs, as long as you could say, here's the thing we want to improve, the objective, and here's how we can measure it. Now, if you don't have any ways to measure things, you might have more of a struggle. But again, in a lot of companies starting out, we don't know, or we don't have things to measure. But setting how we're going to measure the improvements, how we're going to measure the outcomes, is the first step in that, and seeing what is important. So absolutely, in some businesses, you won't have KPIs. More established businesses will have KPIs. Those KPIs are, as it says, key performance indicators of the high-level things, but there's a lot of sub-metrics or other areas that are important as well in many businesses.
Yeah,
so,
I guess we don't have any more KPI related questions, but if you do still have some confusion in that area, feel free to post more questions to the chat. Now, that promised story question, it needs some background information, and it goes like this. We are rebranding our company, and the real outcomes of this rebranding will only be seen in 2 quarters. We know what outcomes we want in 2 quarters, but they're not for this quarter. How do we write OKRs for something that just needs to get done, like new website, new messaging, new designs, so that a quarter from now, 2 quarters from now, we see that impact we were hoping for?
Good question. Very good question. So, the end outcomes you want, but okay, hey, we need to do a new website. Well, I guess you're doing a new website for a purpose, I'm sure. And the purpose isn't to do a new website, the new message, new design. The purpose is for the rebrand, or people connecting with a new message, or all those other things. So it's very common in marketing. And actually, it's a great question, because we've even seen it. A lot of things in marketing can take 6 months, 9 months to take effect. And a lot of times people say, oh, well, I can't write OKRs because the end result is over here. So, okay, if I redo the website, and some of that website is supposed to bring leads in, I could look at impressions. I could see the impressions measure, which is a Google Analytics measure, i.e. how many people are searching and seeing content or my page or my landing pages. I could see that immediately. And if I'm doing the website as I'm launching it, if I've done the pages correctly, I should see impressions rising. And I will see that from day one. And any improvements I make will very quickly impact impressions, but they might not impact the end outcomes we want. A good example is we had something similar. We were talking and said, well, for these search terms, on this page or on this site we wanted to get them into the top 3. To do that, probably is going to take 6 or 9 months, pretty much as you say here. You know, there's page, there's design, there's promote, there's a lot of things have to happen. But when we went back and looked at impressions, and when we started actioning improvements on the site, we saw impressions grow. We saw click-through rate from impressions to click-through rate grow. So you can absolutely split it down into what can we drive from day one, or, you know, we launch the website or we start putting pages up, because saying we want this outcome with a new website is we have to get the page up, we have to see what works and what doesn't work. We have to iterate and test. So it's super important to really think through what are the closer to launch or initial measures that we'll see. And it's in marketing, it is very important. I think, I don't remember the article written, but somebody said it's like throwing a stone in water. You know, if you see how far you can throw the stone, the waves by the time they reach you are very, very small. But where the stone landed in the water, the waves are big. You're looking for those measures close to the impact you're making today, the things you're actioning today, launching maybe the first version of the website or testing a new message out. And how do you measure whether it's the right message? You can't, you know, do it all at once. You can't just launch it all at 6 months down the road and then start testing. You've got to start iterating, launching pieces of it and moving it forward. So it's really thinking through, how would we split it up? How would we understand something's working earlier on? What are the indicators that things are moving in the right direction? So a super good question, not easy to do, but there are always things that are much earlier, much more impacted by the early stage. For example, impressions, are we getting visited, etc., versus maybe customer sign up or SEO ranking in 1 to 3 for a section or search terms. I hope that answers the question, but splitting it down, because if you're going to spend 6 months redoing your website and then you get 6 months down the road and you find out it doesn't work, you've wasted a lot of time. So the idea of OKRs is you should think about when you launch it and you start iterating how to improve it.
Actually, on the topic of splitting things up, we have another question, and it's more about, is it okay to set an OKR for a year?
You wouldn't set an OKR for a year. I mean, basically you're defeating the purpose of using OKRs. You know, the point of the OKRs, you might set a company objective for a year, but then you would split it into what is the sub-focus for the quarter at the company level. But team OKRs would always be quarterly. The idea is you split it down into what do you need to achieve this quarter? What improvements do you need to drive for the quarter? Often it might be driving towards something longer term, but the big problem with the year is, you know, what happens? We're into 2022. And can anybody tell me, you know, with C19, is it still going to be here at the end of next year? Is it going to vanish by the middle of the year? We're going to be back to normal? You know, who knows? And that's the problem. You know, you can set some very long-term goals, but a lot of cases you can't predict the future. Things change at a pace. OKRs are set for the quarter. You know roughly what's going to happen in a quarter. There's probably not going to be any big changes in Q1 with C19, wherever you're located. So you can set and plan for Q1, execute to drive things forward and improve. If something does start to change, you might change what you do in quarter 2. So setting for them a year defeats the purpose of OKRs. You know, yearly planning was the old ways of doing things.
Yeah. We have some smaller questions. I guess they are pretty like 1-sentence replies, but let's go through those ones as well. So would key result be similar to a SMART goal?
In some ways they are. I mean, OKRs in a sense were a step on. SMART was a version prior to OKRs. In a sense, you know, specific, measurable, actionable, or, you know, timelines, etc., is everything that OKRs. Thing is, the timeline is, OKRs are generally fixed at a timeline for quarters. The objective and the key results splits out this specific, measurable, actionable element. So The objective is what I'm trying to achieve, what I'm trying to improve. The key results are the measurable outcomes. It's a little more detailed. It's the next step on. If you've already done SMART goals, you can usually step into OKRs. It makes the stepping a little bit easier. They are related. SMART came first, OKRs overtook it later.
Yeah, business world is constantly developing, so new things appear. Another next question is actually not the one that we're getting often, so I think it's an interesting also thing to discuss. What kind of training and certification would you recommend to someone who had to implement OKRs in a growing company?
There isn't such a thing as certificates for OKRs. OKRs isn't as specific a process. You know, in a lot of areas, you might say, well, somebody's trained as a Scrum master, for example. OKRs are a method, you know, and I think it's very, very difficult. There are people out there that say, hey, you can do a course and we'll give you a certificate. Okay, great. If you like collecting certificates, that's great. I think the training, what you need to do is, it's not just about training. Training helps you understand OKRs and maybe write better OKRs at the beginning. What you really need with OKRs is you need to have practiced them, you need to have used them, you need to have tried them over 3-4 quarters. I would definitely say for the training, there's a lot of good materials to read. You know, there's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of webinars as we're doing here. There's a lot of good information out there. Be careful, there's also some really terrible information as well. We actually keep a list of good and bad materials that we see out there, but I think a lot of it is about keeping up to date with the content, reading books. There's a lot of good books out there, you know, recently the ones by Ben Montgomery, you know, Measure What Matters. There's Ben Lamort has written a book, very practical guides, you know, Christina Vodka's, you know, books. There's a lot of books out there about OKRs. Now, I would suggest there's a lot to read, but ultimately what makes you good at OKRs is practice. You learn what works and doesn't work. And honestly, what works and doesn't work can be a little bit different in different companies as well.
Yeah, okay. Bruno is asking for the link to the list. I'm guessing the list of resources. We'll post it in a bit.
Yeah.
So keep an eye on the chat. I'll post it there in a bit.
Okay.
We only have 2 questions
Okay.
left. So far, if anyone else wants to ask something, now is the time, because we will be wrapping up shortly. So the question is, we briefly already touched it, I think, but it's still an open question, and we did have quite a few of these. So are OKRs suitable for a small company? I understand OKR is a tool for teams. Is there a value for individuals, like a solopreneur in my case? So these are actually 2 different questions from 2 different people, but they're on the same topic. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, definitely they are. There's a few reasons why you can use OKRs. So often as an individual, solo entrepreneur, you might use OKRs for personal development. How am I going to improve what I do as me? You know, what are the objectives I want to achieve for the next quarter? It could be, hey, I want to learn to present better. You know, I want to improve my presentation skills, and I would set measurable outcomes, maybe present at 5 conferences, ask 10 attendees, you know, to score me 1 to 10 or whatever it may be. Set something for yourself. Can also be even in solo entrepreneurs or very small companies, just setting high-level OKRs for what do we want to improve as an individual or a business for the quarter. We have companies that use Weekdone for free with 3 people in very, very tiny startups, but they set, you know, for the quarter, what are the top 3 priorities? Those are the 3 objectives. They set the key results and they start executing on it. Now, often as a small business, you know, you're wearing multiple hats, you're doing lots of different things, but making sure you focus some of your time, not just on the day-to-day executional, but make sure you're focusing on how do I drive my small business forward. It's really what the OKRs are about. It's about driving the business forward. And if you don't set something that makes you think about how do we improve, you tend to get caught up with the day-to-day. So whether you're a single entrepreneur or whether you're a small team of 2 or 3 people, the habit or the practice of setting what are we going to work on to improve and executing on it is always a good one. If you start it when you're small and you are growing as a business, it helps you keep moving it forward. It helps keep it in control as you move forward. I hope that answers it. So
I feel like we do have a lot of solopreneurs or small companies today in the audience. So this is quite interesting because getting organized at an early stage of a company is quite an interesting topic. When you don't have any processes, trying to implement everything all at once is quite a challenge. So it's a really interesting question. Again, we only have one question left. So if anyone wants to ask something, do post in the chat. Last chance. The question is, what are the questions that we can discuss while evaluating the performance with the team members on the OKR set for them?
Wow, that's a weird question. So I'm not sure I fully understand it because team members don't have OKRs or shouldn't have OKRs.
Yeah, I think the question comes from how can we control people or how can we evaluate their bonuses based on how successful they are with their OKRs.
OKRs. So OKRs about collaborate. We talk about motivation and collaboration, and a great way to demotivate people is to tell them what they have to achieve down to those levels. In most performance systems, you might have metrics or KPIs to set and level them, but OKRs are not an individual performance measurement tool. They are for setting up a team to deliver business improvement, outcome improvements. That's not what OKRs are for. So individuals usually don't have OKRs. And in fact, if you set individual OKRs, if they are individual personal improvement OKRs, they can work quite well. If they are individual OKRs for the work they need to do, you're usually taking something where you're trying to break down the silos, get people communicating. You're actually turning it around and making the team members individual silos again. So a lot of people want to go down to that level, but actually it has a negative impact on the team and people. It literally adds the silos back, which is exactly, if you measure what matters, what you're trying to undo. And it makes sense. If I start to define down to the outcomes that every individual needs to do, rather than getting the team to work on a sole, OKR or OKRs, and really discuss it, think about it, work out what we're going to action as outputs, but with a common OKR to drive forward, that's creating these discussions. And it's often creating discussions in the team and across the teams, which is back to the first question. If I go down to that personal level and start to set things that complicated, I actually won't have cross-functional, I won't have collaboration, I will create silos, and it's not what OKRs were ever developed for. They were never, ever meant as a performance tool. Forget, what is it, chapter 15 in Measure What Matters? Go and read it, well worth it.
We only have one question left, and it actually works brilliantly because this was, I think, the question we started with today, and it was about shared OKRs, and you asked a lot of follow-up questions. So we actually have a follow-up question on that. And the question is, how do you handle and track so-called shared key results, for example, customer satisfaction or NPS?
Yeah.
This one is impacted by lots of products, teams. So who's owning this key result? Would you recommend, wait a second, this is a big question. Would you recommend not to define any KRs which are not in your team's control?
Definitely, I wouldn't set any key results that are not in my team's control. It's pointless. The thing is, if you take NPS, you're absolutely right. NPS or customer satisfaction is a company-wide problem. So if that is our big thing to fix, and often this is one of the ones, so NPS is often a KPI, and let's say we're 70 and our target is 60, we're above. We don't need to set OKRs to improve our NPS, we're good. If, however, our target was 60 and we were 50 on the NPS, we might say, well, this is a problem. But it depends how we then frame this problem. We might say we need to improve we need to satisfy our customers as a company level objective. And then the teams set the OKRs that would drive for them an improvement in satisfied customers. And if you think about it, it could be sales, support, product, you know, again, exactly as defined there. It could be a lot of different teams that are actually driving the NPS, but they should only be setting an OKR for their team. What is it that they can do to improve NPS and aligning it up with a company level objective to drive NPS forward? So we may well have it, you've got the KPI, we've set the KPI, we said we're under, we want 60, we're at 50. We set an objective at the company level, and then we say, right, teams, what and which teams are going to have an NPS OKR, but what is it for their team? Rather than trying to write something that's all over the place, that everybody writes everything for other teams, which really doesn't work. You know, if product need to improve some things, usually it's not one area. You know, it's like, hey, we need to improve this, and this to drive up the NPS. So it's a good question. It's a lot of it is about alignment. If it's a problem, maybe set it as a company level objective and get the teams and different teams to write their contributing OKRs that drive it forward. I would also suggest, and we regularly do this, we might have product, sales, customer success, and product all discussing the OKRs in one big room. So they'll still set them for the separate teams, but they'll discuss them as a group to understand how it interacts with each other. Get true understanding, get true cross-functional understanding for the OKRs, so we can have sales, CS, product, and maybe marketing OKRs, but everybody understands what they're doing to drive up the NPS at the high level. So it's a good question. It's very common that people try to then add the KRs and they try to link it down everywhere. It's trying to force down what you think the answer is versus get the teams to fix their areas, the bits they control, that align up to the company, driving NPS back up again.
Well, thank you. I think this is a perfect question to wrap up our session.
Yeah, very good one. A couple of very good questions. You know, I love the one about the market. You know, we've had the same thing. It's like, yeah, we want to drive this up, and it takes 6 months. It's like, okay, stop. Let's think about what we need to measure. What do we see measured first? What does it impact? A lot of the things we're talking about, you know, and the last one there, this alignment, how do you get teams to work together, is not always the way you think. You know, I always used to think, you know, alignment was about making sure you connected everything together. What you actually learn is when you're doing OKRs and you've done it for a while, it's that understanding that people understand what the problems are in other teams and how they work. And when you get that, the teams naturally say, oh, well, I could improve this, which would help you, you know, and drive something forward better. Or we could also go in that direction, or more specifically in that direction, and that would help us both. So I think alignment is a very key thing. It's mentioned in a lot of materials, but it's not always as simple as people think it is. It's not just drawing some lines on a chart or connecting OKRs together. It's much, much deeper.
Okay, then we're
Super.
done for today.
Good. Thanks, everybody. I hope everybody found it useful. And if you've got any ideas for other webinars, please let us know. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.